Let me ask you something personal. When was the last time you came home from a social event, a birthday music party, a family dinner, a work happy hour, and felt genuinely good? Not just music relieved, not just glad it was over, but actually times good. For a lot of you watching this, that memory is hard to find because somewhere along the way, something changed. You used to be able to handle parties, music, handle small talk, handle the noise of other people's lives brushing up against yours. But now you feel drained before the night even ends. You count the minutes until you can leave. You make excuses to stay home. And then once you're home, clears throat. Once the door closes and the quiet wraps around you, you feel something you can almost only describe as time's music relief. And the worst part isn't the exhaustion. The worst part is the guilt, because you've been told your whole life that wanting to be around people is healthy. That isolation, music, is a warning sign that if you'd rather stay in on a Friday night than go out, something must be wrong with you. But what if that's not true? Music. What if the desire to stay home, the pull towards solitude, the preference for silence over socializing, isn't a symptom of something broken inside you, but actually a sign that something is working? Today, we're going to dig into why some of the most psychologically aware people on the planet, music, consistently pull away from social life, not out of fear, not out of depression, but because of a very specific shift in how they experience the world. We're going to look at what that shift actually is, why it happens, why it makes social situations so exhausting, music, and what it means. If this sounds like you, this isn't going to be a video telling you that you're special, music, or that other people are beneath you. That's not what this is. This is an honest, grounded look at a real psychological phenomenon, one that a lot of people are experiencing, but very few are talking about clearly. Music. So, let's get into it. Here's something that shows up again and again in people who've done serious personal development work. And by serious, music, I mean the real stuff, not the vision boards, not the affirmations, the actual hard work of looking at yourself honestly. Music, examining your patterns, understanding why you do the things you do, and slowly, painfully changing. People who go through that process often come out the other side healthier in almost every measurable way. Their relationships improve, their boundaries get clearer, their self-awareness deepens. Music, they stop repeating the same cycles. By any standard framework for psychological health, they're doing music better. But they also report something that confuses them and sometimes scares them. They stop wanting to be around people. Music, not in a dramatic sudden way. It's more of a slow fade. They start saying no to more invitations. They start needing longer periods of recovery after social situations. They start noticing that the events they used to enjoy now feel hollow, draining, or just kind of pointless. And they don't understand why, because they know they've done the work. They know they're not depressed. They know they're not in a trauma response. Something music has shifted, but they can't name what it is. And here's the critical thing. Music, because they can't name it. And because everyone around them insists, music, that wanting to be alone is a problem, they start to question themselves. They wonder if they've regressed. Music. They wonder if they've developed some kind of social anxiety they didn't have before. They force themselves back into social situations, white-knuckling music, it through dinners and gatherings and events, only to come home feeling worse than before. Music. The confusion itself becomes exhausting. So what's actually happening? Music. To understand this, we have to talk about what actually changes in a person when they go through genuine psychological growth. Most people move through the world operating on a kind of automatic setting. Not because they're stupid or bad music people, just because that's how human psychology works. We develop patterns early in life. We build defense mechanisms. We create a version of ourselves, sometimes called a persona, that we present to the world. And we get so used to wearing it, music, that we forget it's a mask. We tell ourselves and others that we're fine when we're not. We project our insecurities onto other people. Music. We rationalize decisions that are actually driven by fear. We avoid conflict by pretending everything is okay. Music. We seek approval in ways we don't even consciously register. All of this happens beneath the surface of our awareness. Music. Now, when you go through the process of real self-examination, when you start to look honestly at your own patterns, your own defenses, your own blind spots, something remarkable happens. Music. You develop the ability to see your own psychology clearly. You start to catch yourself in the act. You notice when you're projecting. Music. You notice when you're rationalizing. You notice when the story you're telling yourself doesn't actually match reality. That ability is hard-won. It takes courage to look at yourself that clearly. Music. Most people never do it. But here's the thing nobody warns you about. Once you've developed the ability to see your own psychological patterns with that kind of clarity, you can't turn it off. And it doesn't stay pointed only at yourself. It expands outward. Music. You start seeing the same patterns in everyone around you. Not because you're judging them, not because you think you're better than them, but because you've trained yourself to see beneath the surface, and now that's just how music you see automatically, involuntarily, all the time. This is the shift that changes everything. Music. Let me paint a picture for you. You're at a dinner party, 8 people around a table, good food, some music, wine, the kind of low-stakes social gathering that most people consider a pleasant evening. Music. But here's what you're experiencing. If you're someone who's gone through this shift, you're listening to your friend talk about how great things are at work, but you can feel the anxiety underneath. The way he laughs just slightly too loud, the way he keeps checking his phone, music, you know, without being told that something is wrong. Across the table, 2 people are having what looks like a friendly debate about politics, but you're watching the actual dynamic, who's performing for the group, music, who's seeking validation, who's using the conversation to feel superior rather than to actually exchange ideas. The content of what they're saying almost doesn't matter. You're watching the machinery underneath. Music. Your friend's wife makes a comment that sounds sweet on the surface, but you catch the edge in it, the passive aggression that the rest of the table either doesn't notice or has agreed not to notice, and you watch your friend laugh it off, and you can see the cost of that in real time. None of this is something you're trying to do. Music. You're not analyzing people on purpose. You're just receiving it all at once constantly. Meanwhile, you're also doing something else. You're managing. You're calibrating exactly how much of what you're actually perceiving you can show. Because if you react to what you're really seeing, music, if your face reflects the actual complexity of what's happening in that room, people will think something is wrong with you. Music. So you maintain the performance. You smile at the right moments. Music. You keep the conversation light. You act like you're just having a normal dinner. You're running 2 completely separate tracks of consciousness at the same time for 3 hours straight. Is it any wonder you need an entire day to recover? This is what we might call perceptual overload. And it's specifically cognitive, not emotional. Highly aware people aren't necessarily more emotional than others. In fact, many of them have gotten very good at not absorbing other people's emotions. The issue isn't that they feel too much. It's that they perceive time times too much. They're processing an enormous amount of information that most people in the room aren't even registering. Music. It's like being the only person in the building who can hear a frequency that everyone else's ears can't pick up. Music. After a while, the noise is unbearable. Not because you're weak, but because you're the only one hearing it. Now here's where it gets more complicated, music, and more uncomfortable. The exhaustion of perceiving too much is real, but there's another layer to why highly aware people pull away from social situations, and it has less to do with exhaustion and more to do with integrity. Music. Most social interaction operates on a set of unspoken agreements. We agree to take things at face value. We agree not to name what's really happening beneath music, the surface. We agree that if someone says they're fine, we'll treat them as fine. We agree to reflect back the version of themselves that people are performing rather than the version we can actually see. These agreements aren't malicious. In a lot of ways, they're what makes social life function. If everyone said exactly what they perceived all the time, music social interaction would be chaos. So we smooth things over. We keep things light. We let certain things go unacknowledged. There's a social contract, and most music people are comfortable with it. But if you've spent years learning to see clearly, learning to be honest with yourself, to stop lying to yourself, to call things by their actual names, that social contract starts to feel like something else entirely. It starts to feel like lying, and not just ordinary social lubricant, but a kind of collective agreement to deny reality. Everyone in the room can sense that something is off, but everyone has agreed not to say music so. Everyone knows that a certain dynamic is unhealthy, but everyone has decided to treat it as normal. Everyone is performing a version of themselves that isn't quite real, and everyone is pretending those performances are the real thing. For someone who has done serious work to stop lying to themselves, participating music in that collective denial feels almost physically uncomfortable. Not because they're self-righteous about it, music, but because it requires them to actively suppress the thing they've worked hardest to develop, the ability to see clearly and live honestly. You've spent years learning to be real with yourself, and now you're being asked to go back to pretending every single time you walk into a social situation. Music. That's not just exhausting, that's a genuine conflict of values. So, highly aware people end up facing a choice that nobody, music, prepared them for. Option 1. Participate in social life the way everyone else does. Music. Engage with the surface. Pretend you only see what others see. Play along with the collective agreement. Stay in the room. Keep music smiling. Maintain the performance. The cost of option 1 is that you have to betray yourself. You have to suppress your perception. Music. You have to essentially lie not to others, but to yourself. And for someone who has worked very hard to stop doing exactly that, this cost is enormous. It doesn't just drain them, it erodes something fundamental. Option 2. Be honest about what you're actually perceiving. Stop playing along. Name the dynamics you're observing. Music. Refuse to maintain the performance. The cost of option 2 in most social settings is immediate and severe. Music. People get defensive. They call you negative, judgmental, too. Music, intense. They say you're reading into things that you see problems where there aren't any music, because from where they're standing, the deeper layers you're pointing to aren't visible. Music. Your perception looks like projection, and often the result is rejection. The message, music, becomes clear quickly. If you can see beneath the surface and you refuse to pretend you can't, music, you won't fit in. Most highly aware people try option 1 for a while. They go to the parties, they do the small talk, they bite their tongue and nod along and maintain music, the performance. But over time, the cost compounds, the exhaustion accumulates, and something starts to shift. They realize they can't keep music doing it, not because they're giving up, but because they're choosing themselves. Because they understand that betraying your own perception repeatedly, music, over a long period of time, is a form of self-harm. And they've already done the work of stopping self-harm. They're not going music back. So they start saying no. Slowly at first, then more and more. Fewer events, shorter music visits, longer stretches at home, very feminine. And home, that quiet, private, self-governed space, starts to feel like something almost music sacred. Let's talk about what's actually happening when highly aware people are alone. Because it's not what most people assume. They're not moping. They're not hiding. They're not avoiding life. They're processing. Think about the amount of information a highly aware person takes in during a single social event. The emotional undercurrents, the interpersonal dynamics, the gaps between what was said and what was meant, the patterns that are playing out, often with predictable trajectories. That's a music lot of data, and it doesn't stop being real just because the event is over. When a highly aware person comes home and sits in silence, they're not doing nothing. They're integrating. Music. They're giving their nervous systems a chance to process everything they absorbed. They're returning to a baseline state where they don't have to manage anyone else's experience of them. They're allowing themselves to think clearly. There's also something else happening, something subtler, alone. They can be fully themselves in social situations. Highly aware people are almost always managing, calibrating, adjusting how much of their perception they reveal, deciding in real time what's safe music to say and what needs to stay hidden. It's a form of performance, even if it's a performance born out of social necessity rather than dishonesty. Music. But alone, there's nothing to manage, no one to protect from the weight of what they see, no social contract to uphold. They can music think what they actually think, feel what they actually feel, perceive what they actually perceive, without any of it needing to be filtered, softened, or explained. That freedom is not a small thing. For someone who has spent hours, music, doing the psychological equivalent of manual labor, that freedom is restoration. Music. It's air. This is why highly aware people often say they don't feel lonely when they're alone. The conventional assumption is that solitude equals loneliness. That if you're by yourself, music must be missing something. But the experience of many highly aware people is exactly the opposite. They often feel most lonely in crowds, surrounded by people unable to be real, unable to connect at any depth. That is the loneliness they know. Alone, music, they feel accompanied by their own minds. They're not missing the crowd. The crowd for them is where the loneliness lives. Music. Now, I want to address something directly, because I know a lot of you are sitting with it right now. The guilt. If any of this is resonating with you, if you recognize yourself in this pattern, there's a very good chance you've also been carrying a low-grade, music, persistent guilt about it. Because everything you've ever been told about mental health says that wanting to be around people is good and wanting to be alone is suspect. Your family worries about you. Your friends take it personally when you don't show up. You've maybe even had a therapist suggest that your preference for solitude is something to work through rather than something to honor. Music. And because you're self-aware, because you've done the work and you know how to question yourself, music, you've probably turned that suspicion inward. You've asked yourself whether you're hiding, whether you're music avoiding, whether the comfortable feeling you get at home is health, or just a really convincing defense mechanism. That's a music fair question to ask. Self-examination is never wasted. But here's a useful test. Music. When you're alone, do you feel depleted or restored? When you're in social situations that require performance, do you feel connected or do you feel more alone than you did before music got there? Is your solitude giving you clarity, creativity, and a sense of self? Or is it shrinking your world and increasing your fear? Music. If solitude restores you, if being home gives you energy, clarity, and a sense of integrity, then your preference for it isn't dysfunction. It's wisdom. It's your nervous music system and your psychology telling you what they actually need. If solitude is shrinking you, if you feel increasingly fearful of social situations, if your world is getting smaller and smaller, if you're using "I'm too aware for this" as an excuse to avoid the vulnerability of real connection, music, then that's worth looking at. Honestly, this distinction matters because highly aware people can fall into a specific trap using their perceptiveness as a justification for total withdrawal. Music, telling themselves that no one can really meet them, that engagement is pointless, that they're too conscious for human relationship. That's not awakening. Music. That's armor. and it's worth being honest about the difference. Here's something that often surprises people when they learn about this pattern. Highly aware people who have largely stepped back from social life are not in most cases actually alone, or at least they don't have music to be. What they've done is become extraordinarily selective. Most people maintain a wide social network of varying depths. A lot of acquaintances, some friends, a few close relationships. For highly aware people, that structure tends to invert. The wide network gets smaller. The acquaintance layer nearly disappears. Music, but the connections that remain get deeper, more real, more sustaining. Because what highly aware people have discovered is that there are other people out there who also see beneath the surface. People who don't need the performance. People who can handle honesty. People who can sit with complexity without deflecting or getting defensive. Music. People with whom you don't have to pretend. Those connections, when they're found, are extraordinary. Music. The quality of presence and depth of understanding that's possible between two people who both see clearly is unlike anything available in surface-level social interaction. There's no performance to maintain, no careful editing of what you say, no bracing yourself for rejection. When you name something real, you can just be honest, and the other person can receive it, and then they can be honest back, and you can receive that. That exchange, simple as it sounds, is genuinely rare. And for highly aware people, one of those connections is worth more than 100 shallow ones. So the goal isn't to isolate. The goal is to stop spending energy on connections that require self-betrayal, and to preserve that energy for the rare connections that actually sustain. Music. Quality over quantity isn't just a preference. At a certain point, it's a survival strategy. Music. There's a hard truth in all of this, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I glossed over it. Music. Some of your relationships will not survive this. Not because you've done anything wrong, not because the other person is music bad, but because some relationships were built on a version of you that no longer exists. A version that went along with things, music, that stayed small, that didn't see too clearly or say too much. And when you music change, when you stop being that version of yourself, there's no longer a foundation for those relationships to stand on. Some people in your life were comfortable with you because you were unconscious in specific ways that worked for them. Your people-pleasing made you easy to be around. Your conflict avoidance made gathering smooth. Your willingness to look the other way kept certain dynamics intact. And when you stop doing those things, when you start seeing clearly, music, and living accordingly, those people don't experience it as you growing. Music. They experience it as you changing in ways that are inconvenient or threatening to them. That's painful, music, and it's real, and the grief of it shouldn't be minimized. Music. But here's what's also true. You cannot maintain relationships by betraying yourself. The version of connection that requires you to stay unconscious, music, isn't actually connection. It's a transaction. And you don't owe anyone access to a version of yourself you've had to work very hard to leave behind. This doesn't mean burning bridges. It doesn't mean announcing your growth to people who didn't ask. It doesn't mean writing anyone off as not awakened enough. It just means accepting quietly, music, without drama, that not every relationship is meant to survive the changes that come from becoming more fully yourself, and that what grows in the space left behind can be much more real than what you let go. Music. So what does this actually look like day to day? If you recognize yourself in this pattern, what do you do music with it? First, stop apologizing for needing solitude. You don't music owe people an explanation for your recovery process. You don't need to justify wanting to stay home. I'm not up for it tonight. Music is a complete sentence. The guilt you've been carrying is largely the result of social conditioning that doesn't apply to your actual experience. You can put it down. Music. Second, be thoughtful about who gets access to you. Not cold, not dismissive, but intentional. Music. Your time and energy are real resources. Highly aware people have a finite amount of capacity before they hit depletion. Music. Spending that capacity on social situations that drain without nourishing is a choice, and it's one you can start making differently. Music. Third, stay open. This is the counterbalance, because the risk of this whole framework, music, taken too far, is that it becomes a self-sealing justification for never showing up. "I'm too aware" can become a story that sounds like consciousness, but functions like avoidance. Keep asking yourself honestly, is my solitude opening me up or closing me down? Is it restoring me so I can engage more authentically? Or am I using it to hide from the vulnerability that real connection requires? Music. Real connection, the kind that highly aware people actually crave, requires showing up. It requires music being seen, not just seeing. It requires risk, not just perception. And if you've completely closed yourself off in the name of protecting your awareness, you've traded one kind of pain for another. Fourth, trust the difference between depletion, music, and discomfort. Some social situations are depleting in a way that tells you they're genuinely not right for you. But some social situations are uncomfortable in a way that just means they're stretching you. Learning to distinguish between those two feelings is one of the most useful skills you can develop. Depletion is a signal to protect yourself. Discomfort, music, is sometimes a signal to lean in. And fifth, find your music people. I know that sounds simple to the point of being useless, but it's music real. There are other people who see clearly, who crave depth, who are tired music of performance, who don't need you to pretend. They exist. They may be harder to find than the average social circle, but the search is worth it. Because when you find even one person who can meet you honestly, the landscape changes. Music. Let me bring this home. If you are someone who has done genuine work on yourself, who has looked at your own patterns honestly and changed, and you find that you've become someone who mostly wants to be home, who struggles to enjoy social situations you used to navigate easily, who feels more alone in a crowd than in your own company, you are not broken. What you're experiencing is the natural consequence of becoming more aware in a world that often rewards the opposite. You've developed the ability to see clearly, and that clarity makes certain environments genuinely difficult, music, to be in without paying a high cost. Your preference for solitude isn't avoidance, it isn't depression, it isn't failure. It's your psychological system doing what it's supposed to do, protecting the thing you've worked hardest to build at the same time. And this is important. Your awareness is not a reason to give up on connection. It's a reason to seek better connection, to find the music, rare, real, honest kind, to stop settling for relationships that require you to be less than you are, and to remain open to the ones that don't. Music. You are not meant to perform your way through life. You're not meant to shrink yourself to fit spaces that were built for a version of you that no longer exists. But you're also not meant to close yourself off entirely, because the very thing that makes social situations difficult for you, the ability to see clearly, to perceive deeply, music, to be honest, is also exactly what makes you capable of the kind of connection most people never experience. That's not a music burden. Even when it feels like one, it's a gift, and the right people will recognize it. Stay home when you need to, show up when it's real, and trust yourself enough to know the difference.